So real quickly about my background, studied here 2004 to 2006 and focused mostly on agriculture and the environment. Then my house almost burned down in Australia when I moved there, and I ended up in Washington, D.C. with World Wildlife Fund, and I've been there ever since. So it's about 6.5 years now, and I spend most of my time working with the private sector in developing field programs and multi-stakeholder based standards, specifically Bonsucro, formerly known as the Better Sugarcane Initiative. I'm on the board of directors of Bonsucro and have been there for the last 3 years, 2 of which I served as chairman, and work with companies ranging from the Coca-Cola company to Bacardi to PepsiCo, Shell, BP, and then producers around the world of sugarcane. So we can keep this talk pretty informal today, and so I'll have probably about 30-40 minutes of straight type slides, but if you have any burning questions in the middle, feel free to raise your hand and we can have a discussion. So now, has anyone ever been to a sugarcane mill before? Where's the sugarcane mill? Ooh, which one? Casa de Campo around there? Okay, no, you don't need to apologize. There are a couple down there. But basically, when you think about sugarcane, the mill is the epicenter of there. And this is a Brazilian mill, and so it's a little different from the other mills that you'll find in the world in that there's a lot of ethanol that goes on in Brazil. And half of the cane in Brazil goes into ethanol, and a lot of that ethanol actually ends up in the US right now under the renewable fuel standards too by the EPA. And the important thing about the mill is that it's basically the center of a radius. You have about 60 to 100 kilometers around, sometimes a little bit more, of sourcing area of sugarcane. So you generally have a relatively concentrated area of production, which means you have a generally relatively concentrated area of impact. Now, you might think to yourself, why WWF and sugarcane? We're a conservation organization. Last week, my boss was here, Dave, the jolly guy with the glasses, talking about palm oil. Many of the same things. We're concerned about habitat use or habitat conversion, as well as runoff, greenhouse gas emissions, and other impacts on the environment, as well as people. Now, some quick facts about sugarcane. There are about 24 million hectares around the world planted to sugarcane. Over half the industry is in Brazil, and half the production is in Brazil. And you're looking at about 174 million tons of sugar is produced a year. And that's sugar cane and beet. It's hard to differentiate between the two when you get the aggregate numbers, but about 80% of sugar around the world is from cane, 20% is from sugar beet. In the US, we produce both. In Europe, it's all beet. The US, it's about 50-50 split. And the big issues around sugarcane from a WWF standpoint are that it occurs in our priority areas. So every red arrow on that slide is a WWF priority ecoregion, and that has sugarcane in it. Now, WWF globally has 30 or so priority ecoregions, 35. It changes every year depending on who's making what decisions, and that's the joy of working in a multinational organization. But for sugarcane, the big issues are direct and indirect land use change, as well as impacts on freshwater quality, which we'll talk about in a bit, especially on marine habitats like coral reefs. And on top of that, water use. Sugarcane is an extremely thirsty crop. It is a C4 crop in that it processes carbon through the C4 pathway, much like corn in the US. And then there are also impacts in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Half of the greenhouse gases emitted for sugarcane production come from burning the cane before you harvest it. Now, you burn the cane before you harvest it if you are in a generally manual harvesting system where people walk into the cane fields with machetes and hack away all day. It's not a fun job, but it provides a lot of employment for a lot of people around the world. Additionally, WWF sees sugarcane as a part of global solutions in that it produces both ethanol and bioelectricity. In Brazil, you're talking 3 to 4% of the total electricity produced in that country is from ethanol, or is from a sugarcane mill. At that sugar plant, they're burning bagasse, which is that big pile of fiber. 15% of the sugarcane plant is fiber, and they burn that in a boiler, creates electricity, and they sell it onto the grid. So we see it as a solution in terms of clean energy for the electricity grid, as well as clean energy for your cars. And now they're developing new solutions where sugarcane can be used for diesel, as well as jet fuel, and plastics. So has anyone seen Coca-Cola's plant bottle? That's made from sugarcane, 30%. Eventually, it'll be 100% sugarcane or other plant feedstock, as well as recycled material. Now, sure.
Would that be able to be recycled?
Yes.
Normal recycling route?
Yeah.
Or does it have to go through a composting step?
No, it'll all be through normal recycling.
Change the disposal.
Yeah, they've engineered it to be exactly like that. WWF works on sugarcane in a number of ways. We work with companies in a bilateral arrangement. We lobby on policy for sugarcane, especially ethanol. And then we also work to develop field programs. And today, I will talk mostly about field programs, and next week, we'll have a panel discussion to talk about developing global standards. The 3 projects that I'll talk about today are Project Catalyst in Queensland, Australia, Project Kula. Kula is Zulu for grow. That's in South Africa. And then Project Restore. That's in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Has anyone been to any of these 3 places before? No? All right, so it's like we're going on a tour together. That is a blank slide. So real quick, the reason why, we were just talking about giving presentations. So another reason why WWF is concerned is, here's some quick facts looking forward. So in the future, we're going to have almost 50% area increase just to meet sugar demands alone, because as people become more affluent, they eat more sugar. In India, for instance, sugar has 2 prices. One for poor people because it's a human right, and the other is for everyone else. So you have significant demand around the world. And there is a lot of interplay and a lot of writing about how sugar has played an important role in the Industrial Revolution and a number of other time periods and countries in terms of providing those moments of short-term pleasure to keep people happy amidst somewhat miserable lives, like working in a factory. In terms of WWF's ecoregions, we're seeing expansion in coastal East Africa and the Mekong, and we anticipate that there will be significant expansion in Brazil, in parts of Southeast Asia, in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, as well as other parts of Africa and Mexico, both to meet the demands of sugar as well as ethanol. So, Project Catalyst. Here we have basically one of the flattest parts of the eastern seaboard of Australia called the Burdekin, and it's the sea of sugarcane all along the coast. And right next to it on this coast is the Great Barrier Reef. You can kind of see the islands in that, and not only the islands, but also the coral reef structures themselves. Now, some quick facts about the Australian sugarcane industry. I won't read them to you, but just know that Australia is the 3rd largest trader of sugar in the world, and that this is about a $3 billion, $4 billion industry for the Australians. And it's experiencing a lot of transition right now. Farmers are getting old. In fact, one of the growers who we work with down there said, if you want to save the Great Barrier Reef, hold 3,000 funerals. But that's not necessarily the way we want to go. Now, some of the challenges, can you guys see the words? Sorry, it's kind of white on blue background here. All right, sweet. So the Great Barrier Reef, does anyone know what that is? All right, it's the world's largest living structure. Pretty amazing if you go there. And from an economic standpoint, you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar industry for people in Australia, providing employment for 65,000 people up and down the coast in terms of tourism outfits, as well as you get your multiplier effect. Additionally, the Great Barrier Reef is 2,900 individual structures that connected create this fascinating sort of 3D multidimensional ecosystem. Now, the reef is under threat from two things mainly. There's a third, but it's not as significant. The biggest impact is climate change and coral bleaching. That's the biggest long-term threat. The most immediate impact is from terrestrially based runoff. And that comes from sugarcane production and cattle production, and a little bit from the horticulture sector. 30% of the runoff is from sugarcane, about 70%, just under 70% of the runoff and nutrients are from cattle. And we know that if we reduce that runoff to a level that's acceptable, then we can save the reef in the face of climate change. There's recent research that's come out showing that the coral assemblage will change, coral species will be different, but we can save the reef. Now, these are just some pictures illustrating runoff. So we're dealing with an event-based ecosystem. You get heavy rainfalls that it's a giant flush, just takes everything out. You can see that from space. You've got all that nutrient sediment coming out, and you can see the inner reef shells. There are three sort of reef layers going out east into the Coral Sea. Now here's healthy reef pictures, and here are not so healthy reef pictures. We'll just do this one more time. Sediment, algal outbreaks, as well as outbreaks of the crown of thorn starfish, which feed on corals. Crown of thorn starfish outbreaks come right after heavy events. High correlation between runoff of nitrogen and crown of thorn starfish outbreaks. Now, we also know that sugarcane farmers waste a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. They probably, about 60% of what they put on ends up out on the reef. So not only is that bad for the environment, it's also bad for these farmers because it's in the top 2 or 3 costs of production. And most of these farms, the majority, do not actually make money from farming year in and year out. They get off-farm income to maintain their farms. Now, one of the answers to this is precision agriculture, but there are significant barriers to adopting precision agriculture. And there's been some research lately of why farmers aren't adopting it. Because we think, oh, win situation, but you're talking about a cross-section of the population that's over 60, slow to adapt new technologies, risk-averse because it's all they have. And so the government has created a fund for $150 million to actually transition farmers from their old practices to new practices that are less impactful on the reef. Now, we at WWF and our partners on the ground are taking that a step further because the government program called Reef Rescue is only taking farmers from the 1960s to the 1980s or 90s in terms of technology. We want to take them to the next century. So we've developed Project Catalyst. And Project Catalyst is a multi-stakeholder process and project on the ground where we bring together government agencies, individual farmers, as well as extension officers. Now, extension is expensive in Australia. People are very expensive in Australia to hire healthcare, the cost of fuel, everything is expensive. So what we do is we provide sort of a safe space for farmers to get together and get new extension ideas in and work on creating precision agriculture plans for each farm. And this is what one of those plans looks like, where you have someone come out and spend a couple of days with you. You do soil tests, you look at the yields, and then you figure out what's the best way to improve productivity on your farm while reducing the inputs. And so to date, and we've been going on this for about 5 years, we've reduced annual runoff by 84 tons of particulate nitrogen, 75 tons of dissolved inorganic nitrogen, and nitrogen's our real target here. We also want to reduce pesticides, but nitrogen is the big one. So we now have reached 6% of the industry, and we continue to expand our impacts. Additionally, and this is one of the things that's most exciting about it, is that farmers have started to look over their fence and start imitating and emulating what Project Catalyst growers are doing. And so we're getting a knock-on ripple effect there. Now, I was asked to talk a lot about precision agriculture, and when I think about precision agriculture, you have to find ways of doing precision agriculture that fits the region, because not everyone's going to have $500,000 like these farmers do to buy a harvester or to buy equipment that will run your tractors through global information system or global positioning systems. So we also have a program in South Africa called Project Kula. And Project Kula really focuses on developing improved management practices for farms that are much smaller and for people who don't have as much capital. These are Zulu farmers in the eastern area of South Africa. And to date, we've reached about 600 farmers out of a total of 27,000. And by 2020, we intend to meet the needs of 20,000 farmers. And our big focus with Project Kula is to create a mentorship where you bring together government extension officers and professional farmers, they call them. Essentially, they're the white farmers in South Africa. There are about 1,500 of them. And they create an information exchange with the Zulu farmers. And we provide trainings and a number of activities for them. But before going too much further, the South African sugarcane industry is much smaller than Australia. It's much smaller than Brazil, as we'll talk about later. And it has a number of challenges of its own. And one of the major reasons why Project Kula exists is because we need to find ways of improving relationships between the relatively impoverished black South Africans, mostly Zulu in this area, as well as the relatively wealthy white South Africans, who in the region where Project Kula is are German descendants, whereas in the rest of the industry, they're relatively of Afrikaans origin. Anyway, the other issues that are facing the industry are decreasing production, as you can see by this graph. Since in the last 10 or 12 years, you've gone from 2.6 million tons of sugar per year to 1.8 million. This most recent dip is due to a huge drought, and it should be back up to 2.1 million tons a year. But really, you're seeing a decrease in production, and you're seeing an increase in urbanization of the sugarcane production areas. Not necessarily something we want to see, because we're coming up on an election in South Africa that they tend to be very controversial in this area because of historical issues. And so Project Kula also seeks to build and improve livelihoods so that you can avoid some of the political violence that's occurred in the past. The other major issue that Project Kula looks at is improving water flows in rivers and assuring that there's water for people. There's a report out a few days ago estimating that by 2025, South Africa will be out of water. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but in some areas it will become a very water scarce country. So this is a ranking of the degrees of water stress and for all the main stem rivers. And Project Kula is sort of, let's see, it's right along that orange and yellow area right before it gets in the deep red. So it's a relatively water-stressed area. And much of the water stress in South Africa is not only from use for agriculture, but also the presence of invasive species. So again, in Project Kula, we're trying to develop jobs. And one of those development programs is hiring people to clear invasive species and increase stream water flow. Now going back to the main purpose of Project Kula, which is to improve sugarcane farming. Here we have one of the teams of Project Kula participants. The big white guy in the back, his name is Jurgen. The Zulus call him Big Show because Zulus love wrestling. They seriously watch a lot of WWE, and they're big fans of it, so they call him Big Show. Then you have a government extension agent next to him in the green and white shirt. His name is Good Enough. And then you have a number of other people who are involved in the project. They're standing in a soil pit. And one of the first steps of this program is to work with the farmers to get them to understand the potential of their land. In that they go out, the farmers typically go out and plant sugarcane without the best agronomic practices and without understanding where to plant it and how to plant it. And what they're sitting on right now is some of the best soil in the country. It's better than the white farmers have. Then we develop terraces so that they're planting with the topography rather than against it. This improves yield as well as improving the overall management of the landscape so that water flows off appropriately. Within Project Kula, we deliver the following things. We deliver seed cane nurseries. Now this is important because it provides the sugarcane growers with their own source of seed so that they don't have to buy it from the mill or from other people. It keeps more income in the community. Provide a number of trainings from pest management to planting techniques to soil management. And we also provide jobs through invasive control, through working for water. Additionally, it provides a new sense of community. In addition to increasing your yields by from about 30 tons to 120 tons per hectare and all the multiplier effects that come with it, you bring together people to work together in a way that they haven't done in quite some time. And right here in the woman in red, she's the president of the most successful cooperative, and which is very uncommon in Zulu society because it's a very patriarchal society. You've got chiefs and everything, but she calls all the shots and really brings the community together, makes sure that the money that they make from sugarcane farming gets reinvested in terms of developing the community. They buy new school uniforms. They also bring in doctors every month or two for checkups. Now, this is the last project I'll talk about before we open it up. And this is called Project Restore. This is our newest project with the sugarcane industry, and it's one that we're really excited about, and it's based in Brazil. We've got 5 major focal points for this project. 1 is to increase Bonsucro certification. 2 is to organize farmers and implement better management practices, and we'll link Restore with Project Catalyst to really drive home how farmers facing similar issues around the world can help each other. 3, restore forest in Brazil. The Atlantic forest is the most biodiverse area in the world, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's also one of the most endangered. And then we'll focus on climate protection by increasing the amount of bioelectricity produced at the mill level, and then we'll model the value of nature and create different scenarios for cane expansion as the industry doubles over the next 10 or so years. So Brazilian sugarcane in the state of Sao Paulo. This is half of the industry in one state alone. This is a map. All the red is where the sugarcane is produced, and the green is the Amazon, brown is the Pantanal. So not a lot of direct impact, but there's some indirect impact of sugarcane expansion on the Amazon and other places. Relatively low water stress on the industry because it's not, or on the rivers because it's not irrigated. Most of the water impacts are from water pollution. And a relatively low amount of fertilizer applied. You're looking at 60 kilograms per hectare versus in Australia, if you remember on the previous slide, 150 kilograms, and not that much difference in yield. Now the Atlantic forest, one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. 1 to 8% of all species, and through a number of different sort of sub-ecosystems. There is less than 11% remaining, and it used to span from Paraguay all the way up to the northeast of Brazil. The deforestation rate, I left that off. It's something you'll have to look up. It's actually about less than 1% a year, but still significant because there's very little left. And only 1.62% is under protected status. This graph here demonstrates what used to be in red and what is left in green by state in Brazil. So you can see a very small percentage in the state of Sao Paulo is left. Excuse me. Here is a map of the historic range of the Atlantic forest and what's left. The dark spots are what's left. The light gray is the historic range. So it's a pretty decimated area, largely converted for agriculture. Excuse me. Now the first step in Project Restore is really focused on getting farmer buy-in to improving and restoring the landscape. Now you can't go in and work with the farmer and say, I want you to take 10% of your area out of production and plant trees without giving them some type of benefit. So we are linking them to funding and to other ideas to improve their practices. Now, Brazil is largely seen as the leading sugarcane producer in the world. But as you'll see almost anywhere, there's room for improvement. Here's a picture of some sugarcane farms in Brazil. These are problematic because if there's water like that standing, you can't grow sugarcane. In the recent years, they've had to leave as much as 1 million tons or 1 million hectares unharvested because of poor water management on their farms. So when you have this, you lose a lot of money and you'll need more area to produce. Then you'll also have situations like this, where you'll have washouts. And when you lose your soil, you lose your productive base. So one of our ideas, and that we're developing, is, again, going back to precision agriculture, understanding the way the landscape works and how to work with it. And developing flowways for the water to go. So you go from this, and then you manage it and set up the production areas so that you get natural flowways and don't have that water logging, don't have standing water, can increase yields, increase profitability. After we begin to work with farmers like that, it's our theory that we'll have a more hospitable group of people to work with, and then we'll be able to work with them on restoring the Atlantic forest and the Cerrado as well. We're going to do this through a number of mechanisms. One, organizing the entire industry to really deliver change at scale. Our goal is to get about 150,000 hectares with the industry over the next few years. Over the next 20 years, Brazil is going to have to restore by law 20 million hectares. And they have to do that. Every individual landholder has to do that. And every 2 years, they have to report on how they're doing it and how they're 10% closer than they were 2 years earlier. So the CAR, the key mechanism we'll be working with under the Forest Code is called the CAR. That's Cadastral Ambiental Rural, the Rural Registry of Land. And we'll be working with them to map out specifically where people should restore lands and how to replant. And working with farmers to develop nurseries and taking people who used to have jobs cutting cane, which is not a fun job. You're out there in 90-degree heat all day, little protection from the sun cutting cane. And we want to give them new jobs managing nurseries and managing plantations. And WWF has developed a map for the state of Sao Paulo as to our priorities for where we want to work. This is that map. And the black areas, the black outlined areas, are our priority areas. The green is the remnant vegetation in protect areas. And then the light purple is all the sugarcane. So we have a lot of work to do. And as we progress, we'll be undertaking a monitoring and evaluation system. And to verify that farmers are doing what they agree to. And concurrently, we'll be working with the universities to model out how the industry can expand without doing what they did in the past in terms of impacting biodiversity. We'll be working with academic and private sector interests as well as other NGOs like the Nature Conservancy. Here are our macro goals for engaging with the sugarcane industry. And over the next couple of years, we'll be bringing people on board to create this large sustainability platform. Right now, we've got about 2 or 3 milling groups on board, and over the next couple of weeks, we anticipate we'll have a number of others. So with that, I hope that I've relayed just some of the different ways and situations that you have to work with people around the world because of their different economic situations and the different environmental situations that are impacted by sugarcane. And we'll open up for questions and conversation. So.
So in your setting up of seed banks, are you facing any sort of competition and or opposition from the traditional vendors of seeds to the growers here?
No. With the sugarcane industry, there are only 60 nurseries in the state of Sao Paulo. That's a major logjam. Additionally, the sugarcane industry is transitioning from burning to not burning, and that's going to be about 250,000 people out of jobs. So one of their goals is to also find new jobs, and this will be one source for them to work. There's also a low success rate of restoration success, so we will hopefully increase that.
But there's no like Monsanto with Roundup Ready.
Oh, you mean, okay, in terms of South Africa with the seed banks?
I just meant writ large.
There are companies that are doing that do sugarcane seed production, but sugarcane's sort of an understudied crop versus soy or corn. There aren't that many. It's developed by locally by research institutions.
Outside of Sao Paulo, how much progress is there switching from burning to not burning?
In Brazil,
Or just around the world?
around the world, it depends on the place. Like in India, they don't burn sugarcane. They're the second largest producer of cane. No, they're starting to because of labor shortages, but they don't burn for 2 reasons. One, their sugarcane fields are little 1 hectare, 2 hectare plots, and they're surrounded by other crops, so they don't want the fire to get out of control and burn their neighbor's cotton. The other reason is everybody owns cattle there and dairy cows, so they feed the what gets burned to their cows. And then in places like, it varies. They're trying to phase it out in certain countries, and in others they're not. So, but it's a major issue for sure.
How do you deal with the corruption in Brazil where, you have the flooded spout and they're going to say that they're doing all this restoration, but it's not actually going to happen because someone's trying to rubber stamp it?
Yeah, that's why we're setting up this monitoring system around making sure that people are doing it.